Bob's neighborhood was the picture of suburban peace, a charming, quiet cul-de-sac where families enjoyed barbecues, kids played hopscotch on the sidewalks, and the sound of wind chimes filled the air. At the edge of the neighborhood sat Bob's pride and joy, a small private farm that had been in his family for generations. Surrounded by a sturdy fence and boasting a vibrant garden, a cozy barn, and a rooster weather vane spinning atop the roof, the farm was his sanctuary from the mundane chaos of city life. But every paradise has its serpent, and in this case, it was Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, armed with an iron will, a clipboard, and an uncanny ability to find fault in the tiniest of things. To her, the neighborhood wasn't a community. It was her personal kingdom. Her reign of petty terror had left many in the neighborhood quietly grumbling, but no one dared to openly challenge her, that is, until she turned her sights on Bob and his farm. It started innocently enough, or as innocent as Karen could manage. She appeared at Bob's doorstep one sunny morning, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield of righteousness. Her tone was polite, but her expression betrayed the storm brewing underneath. "Bob," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm sure you're aware of our HOA guidelines. Your fence looks questionable." Pause for dramatic effect. Bob raised an eyebrow. "Questionable?" he repeated, glancing over at the sturdy, well-maintained wooden fence that had stood there long before the HOA even existed. Karen's eyes narrowed as she nodded sharply. "Yes, it doesn't align with the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood." Suppressing a chuckle, Bob replied, "Karen, it's a fence. It's literally designed to blend in." But Karen was undeterred. "Rules are rules," she said with a tight smile before handing him a neatly typed violation notice. As she walked away, Bob couldn't help but shake his head, wondering how someone could take offense so personally. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. Karen's clipboard crusade had just started, and Bob's peaceful farm was about to become ground zero for her latest power trip. Karen's clipboard became a weapon of mass frustration as she ramped up her campaign against Bob's farm. It seemed like every day a new violation notice appeared in his mailbox, each more absurd than the last. One morning, Bob found a bright pink slip accusing him of unauthorized vegetation because his sunflowers were taller than the HOA's recommended height. Another day, she cited him for the reflective hazard caused by the rooster weather vane atop his barn. Bob couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. Karen didn't stop at notices. She took her patrols to the next level, pacing the edge of Bob's property with the intensity of a prison warden inspecting for contraband. On one occasion, she stood on the sidewalk, hands on her hips, glaring at Bob's barn like it had insulted her new haircut. When Bob caught her pointing a laser pointer at his fence, presumably measuring its height, he couldn't contain his disbelief. "Karen, are you serious right now?" he called out, leaning over his porch railing. She turned, clipboard at the ready. "I'm ensuring compliance," she snapped, as though she was single-handedly preserving the sanctity of the neighborhood. Her antics escalated when she began enlisting other HOA members to join her cause. At a hastily arranged HOA meeting, Karen presented a slideshow titled "The Farm Problem," complete with overly dramatic photos of Bob's property. "This fence," she declared, pointing to an image projected on the wall, "is an eyesore. It disrupts the neighborhood's harmony." Bob couldn't help but interject, "Karen, it's a wooden fence. It's practically invisible unless you're standing in my yard." Karen shot him a withering glare. "It's the principle of the matter, Bob. The HOA guidelines are clear, and we all have to follow them." Despite her insistence, the other members were less than enthusiastic about her crusade. A few nodded lightly, but most exchanged amused glances or subtly rolled their eyes. It was clear that Karen's war on Bob's farm was more about her obsession with control than any real violation of the rules. But Karen wasn't deterred by the lack of support. If anything, it only fueled her determination. She began issuing warnings about potential fines for Bob's non-compliance and even hinted at escalating the matter to legal action. Her dramatic behavior reached its peak one afternoon when Bob caught her standing on a stepladder outside his property, attempting to take photos over the fence. "Karen!" Bob shouted, marching toward her. "Get off my ladder!" She huffed, climbing down with exaggerated dignity. "I was merely inspecting for potential violations," she said, clutching her clipboard like a badge of honor. Bob could only shake his head. This wasn't just about a fence or a farm anymore. It was about Karen's insatiable need to wield power, no matter how ridiculous the circumstances. And Bob was determined to push back, no matter how many pink violation slips she stuffed in his mailbox. Bob had always considered himself a patient man, but Karen was testing the limits of his restraint. Despite her constant stream of petty complaints and violation notices, he initially tried to approach the situation with reason and logic. One afternoon, clipboard in hand, Karen returned to Bob's property with yet another complaint. "Bob," she began, her voice dripping with faint concern, "the color of your barn door is not in line with the HOA's approved palette." Bob raised an eyebrow. "Karen, the barn door is brown. The same brown it's been since before you moved here." Karen pursed her lips. "It's not the right brown," she countered, flipping through a stack of swatches as though she were hosting a paint seminar. Bob sighed. "You know what? Fine. I'll consider repainting it. Maybe neon green?" Karen's gasp was so dramatic it could have earned her an award. "That would be a direct violation of the guidelines," she sputtered, clutching her clipboard tighter. Bob smirked, knowing he had struck a nerve. From that moment on, Bob decided to take a subtler approach to push back against Karen's antics. When she left yet another violation notice accusing him of unapproved decorative elements for having a birdhouse in his yard, Bob responded by hanging 3 more birdhouses, each painted in bright, cheerful colors. When Karen threatened fines for the excessive height of his sunflowers, Bob hosted a neighborhood sunflower growing contest, inviting the neighbors to compete in growing the tallest plant. The event was a hit, with families gathering in his yard to measure their plants and share laughs. Karen, standing at the edge of the gathering with her arms crossed, could only see that her authority was quietly undermined. Bob also began collecting evidence of Karen's increasingly absurd behavior. Every time she appeared on his property to inspect his fence or take pictures, he discreetly recorded her on his phone. The footage showed her measuring grass with a ruler, peering through his windows from the sidewalk, and even attempting to photograph his rooster weather vane from a stepladder. But it wasn't just about passive resistance. Bob also sought support from his neighbors. Over time, he discovered that Karen's antics had impacted nearly everyone in the community. Tom, the guy next door, shared how Karen had issued him a warning because his kids' chalk drawings on the driveway weren't HOA approved. Sarah, a retiree down the street, recounted how Karen had accused her cat of unauthorized trespassing on another neighbor's lawn. The stories were endless, and they all had one thing in common: Karen's obsession with control. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to rally behind Bob. While they didn't confront Karen directly, they showed their support in small ways, attending his sunflower contest, sharing their own stories of Karen's overreach, and laughing at his sarcastic quips about her latest violation notices. Karen, of course, noticed the growing camaraderie among her neighbors, and it only fueled her determination. She began escalating her threats, hinting at legal action and issuing daily notices. But for every ridiculous move she made, Bob countered with humor, subtle defiance, and unwavering calm. It was a quiet war of wits, and Bob was determined to win not just for himself, but for everyone in the neighborhood who had endured Karen's clipboard tyranny. Karen's relentless crusade against Bob's farm was the talk of the neighborhood, and soon everyone had an opinion. Some saw her as a necessary enforcer of order, while others thought she was taking her role as HOA president way too seriously. Regardless of where they stood, one thing was certain: Karen's antics had become a source of entertainment for everyone around. Tom, Bob's next-door neighbor, was the first to weigh in. One evening, as Bob was watering his garden, Tom leaned over the fence and chuckled. heard Karen at it again. "What is it this time? Your scarecrow is too intimidating?" Bob laughed, shaking his head. "Close. She says my fence is disrupting the aesthetic flow." Tom snorted. "Aesthetic flow? This isn't an art gallery. It's a neighborhood." As Karen's obsession grew, so did the stories from other neighbors. Sarah, the retired teacher who lived 2 houses down, shared her own run-in with Karen. "She fined me last year for having a bird feeder. Said it attracted undesirable wildlife. Can you believe that?" she said, sipping her iced tea. "I told her the only wildlife around here was her attitude." Then there was Rachel, a young mom whose kids love to draw with chalk on their driveway. "Karen actually knocked on my door to tell me their drawings weren't up to community standards," Rachel said, rolling her eyes. "They're kids, Karen, not moralists." Despite Karen's attempts to maintain control, the neighborhood began quietly uniting behind Bob. It started with small acts of rebellion. Tom left his grass uncut for a week longer than usual, just to see if Karen would say something. Sarah added a second bird feeder to her yard, daring Karen to send another notice. Rachel's kids, sensing the tension, started drawing extra-large chalk pictures that included a cartoon version of Karen holding her clipboard. Word of Bob's subtle retaliation, like the sunflower contest, spread quickly, and neighbors began stopping by his farm to lend their support. Bob noticed how their shared frustration with Karen brought them closer together. At one point, during an impromptu barbecue Bob hosted on his farm, the stories reached a peak of hilarity. Tom recounted how Karen once tried to measure the exact distance between his trash cans and the curb. Sarah revealed that Karen had taken it upon herself to inspect her flower beds for non-compliant blooms. Laughter erupted as Rachel shared the infamous tale of Karen filing a formal complaint about a stray cat trespassing on someone's lawn. Not everyone was on Bob's side, though. A few neighbors, Karen's loyalists, whispered among themselves at the barbecue, shaking their heads disapprovingly. "Rules are rules," one of them muttered. If Bob just followed them, Karen wouldn't have to step in, but the majority of the community seemed to agree that Karen had crossed the line. The once divided neighborhood was now a mix of quiet defiance and growing solidarity, all centered around Bob's farm. It wasn't just about fences or sunflowers anymore. It was about standing up to Karen's unreasonable behavior and reclaiming the peace they had all once enjoyed. Karen, of course, noticed the subtle shift in the neighborhood dynamics. She glared at the increasing number of neighbors who visited Bob's farm and grew more frustrated by the lack of compliance with her every decree. Her clipboard became her constant companion, as if she could use it to regain the control she felt slipping through her fingers. But the more she tightened her grip, the more the neighborhood resisted. Bob's farm became a symbol of quiet rebellion, a rallying point for everyone fed up with Karen's reign of HOA tyranny. The stage was set for the conflict to escalate further, with the entire community now playing a part in the drama. Karen's escalating antics reached a new level of absurdity as she realized she was losing her grip on the neighborhood. Determined to reassert her authority, she turned her full attention to Bob's farm, ramping up her efforts to impose her will. But Bob, with the support of his neighbors and a growing arsenal of evidence, was ready to fight back. One morning, Bob woke up to find Karen trespassing on his property again. This time, she was armed with a measuring tape and a clipboard, furiously scribbling notes as she inspected the height of his fence. Bob, already accustomed to her antics, grabbed his phone and began recording. "Karen!" he called out, approaching her. "What are you doing on my property?" Karen whirled around, clutching her clipboard as if it were a shield. "I'm ensuring compliance with HOA guidelines," she snapped. Bob smirked, holding up his phone. "You're trespassing, and I'm recording this." Karen's face turned red, but she quickly regained her composure. "This is necessary for the integrity of the neighborhood," she declared before storming off, muttering under her breath about ungrateful residents. Bob decided it was time to take action. He reviewed the HOA bylaws and realized Karen had been blatantly overstepping her authority. Armed with his recordings, violation notices, and testimonies from other neighbors, he prepared for the next HOA meeting, a meeting that would ultimately determine Karen's fate. The meeting was packed. Word had spread about Karen's behavior, and nearly every resident showed up, eager to see what would unfold. Karen, as usual, was prepared with her infamous binder of complaints, which she dramatically slammed onto the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone dripping with authority, "the state of our neighborhood is at risk. Certain individuals," she glanced pointedly at Bob, "are blatantly disregarding our community standards." Bob stood up, calm and composed. "If by community standards you mean your personal vendettas, then yes, I suppose I am a room," chuckled, and Karen's glare sharpened. Bob began presenting his case. He played video clips of Karen trespassing on his property, measuring his grass, and taking pictures over his fence. He read aloud the ridiculous violation notices she had issued and highlighted how many of them had no basis in the HOA's official guidelines. Finally, he called on his neighbors to share their experiences. Tom was the first to speak. "She fined me for leaving my trash cans out 5 minutes after pickup." 5 minutes! he exclaimed, shaking his head. Sarah added, "She said my bird feeder attracted undesirable wildlife. Last I checked, cardinals and blue jays weren't a threat to the neighborhood." Rachel chimed in, "She complained about my kids' chalk drawings." "They're kids, not graffiti artists." The room erupted in laughter and murmurs of agreement. As one by one, the neighbors shared their stories, Karen's face grew redder with each testimony, but she tried to maintain her composure, insisting she was only enforcing the rules. When it was Bob's turn again, he delivered the final blow. "According to the HOA bylaws," he said, holding up the document, "Karen has not only overstepped her authority but has also violated multiple rules herself, including trespassing, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds for personal grievances." Gasps filled the room. Karen tried to interject, but the evidence was overwhelming. The HOA board members, who had remained silent until now, exchanged glances and nodded. Based on the evidence presented, one of them said, "It's clear that Karen has been acting outside her authority." Effective immediately, Karen is removed as HOA president. The room erupted into applause and cheers. Karen, speechless for the first time, grabbed her clipboard and stormed out of the meeting, her reign of tyranny officially over. But the poetic justice didn't end there. A week later, Karen received her own violation notice for her overly bright, non-HOA compliant holiday decorations. The irony wasn't lost on the neighbors, who celebrated her downfall with a block party on Bob's farm. As Bob stood among his neighbors, watching the children play and the community laugh together, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karen's reign was over, and the neighborhood could finally return to the peaceful, welcoming place it was meant to be. With Karen officially dethroned as HOA president, the neighborhood collectively exhaled a sigh of relief. Her absence was palpable, and for the first time in years, the cul-de-sac felt lighter, freer. But karma, as they say, has a way of delivering poetic justice, and Karen's downfall was far from over. It started with the very HOA rules she had weaponized against everyone else. A week after the fateful meeting, Karen received an official notice from the new HOA president, Tom. As one of his first acts in office, Tom had conducted a thorough review of Karen's property, applying the same scrutiny she had inflicted on others. The verdict? Karen was in violation of multiple HOA guidelines. Her offenses ranged from the unapproved bright pink flamingos scattered across her lawn to the string of blinding holiday lights she had draped over her house well before the HOA-approved holiday decorating period. The most ironic violation, however, was her fence, which was 2 inches taller than regulations allowed. When the notice landed on her doorstep, Karen was livid. She stormed over to Tom's house, clutching the letter. "This is outrageous!" she bellowed, waving the paper in his face. Tom, calm and composed, replied, "Rules are rules, Karen. Surely you understand." The smirk on his face was subtle but unmistakable. but the real satisfaction came from the neighborhood's response. In the days following her demotion, the neighbors came together in ways Karen could never have anticipated. Bob's farm became the unofficial hub for community gatherings. Families hosted barbecues, kids played games in the open fields, and neighbors bonded over shared stories of Karen's antics. Bob, ever the gracious host, decided to throw a celebration, a symbolic freedom party. The event was attended by nearly every household, and the mood was jubilant. Tom delivered a short, humorous speech, thanking Bob for standing up to Karen and bringing the neighborhood together. The highlight of the evening came when Sarah, the retired teacher, unveiled a surprise. She had commissioned a large sunflower-shaped plaque with the words, "In honor of Bob, defender of the neighborhood." The crowd cheered as Bob accepted the plaque, a light-hearted reminder of how far they had come. Meanwhile, Karen's presence in the neighborhood dwindled. She rarely left her house, except to glare at the joyful gatherings taking place on Bob's farm. Rumors swirled that she was planning to sell her home, unable to endure the embarrassment of her dethroning and the camaraderie that had blossomed in her absence. And one day, she did. A moving truck appeared in front of her house, and within hours, Karen was gone. The neighborhood didn't waste any time. That evening, a group of neighbors hung cheerful decorations along the street and held an impromptu gathering to celebrate. The air felt lighter, and the neighborhood, at long last, felt like home again. Bob stood on his porch, watching as the neighbors laughed and mingled. Tom raised a glass in his direction. "To Bob," he said loudly, "for reminding us all that even the most stubborn clipboard can't ruin a good neighborhood." The crowd roared with laughter and applause. Bob couldn't help but smile. Karen was gone, the farm stood tall, and the neighborhood was united like never before. It was a victory for everyone and a reminder that sometimes, the best way to handle a Karen is to let karma do the heavy lifting. As the sun set and the party continued, Bob leaned back in his chair, content. The grass grew freely, the fences stood proudly, and the community thrived. Life in the cul-de-sac was peaceful once more, and for that, Bob couldn't be happier. Valuable lesson. The valuable lesson here is that community spirit and standing up against unreasonable authority, even in small ways, can overcome negativity and restore peace. It also highlights the importance of not letting petty rules overshadow the essence of neighborliness and common sense. If you love this story and found it entertaining, don't forget to like this video to show your support and help more people enjoy the tale of Karen's epic downfall. Subscribe to our channel for more engaging, hilarious, and satisfying stories like this one. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who's had their own Karen moment in their life. They'll surely relate. Comment below and tell us your favorite part of the story or share your own experiences with HOA drama. We'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another outrageous or heartwarming story. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next one. And you're using 2.0 Flash Thinking Experimental. It may not always work as expected. Bob's neighborhood was the picture of suburban peace, a charming, quiet cul-de-sac where families enjoyed barbecues, kids played hopscotch on the sidewalks, and the gentle tinkling of wind chimes filled the air. At the very edge of this idyllic scene sat Bob's pride and joy, a small, private farm that had been in his family for generations. Surrounded by a sturdy wooden fence and boasting a vibrant garden bursting with color, a cozy red barn, and a rooster weather vane spinning merrily atop the roof, the farm was his sanctuary. It was his escape from the mundane chaos of city life. But every paradise, it seems, has its serpent, and in this case, it slithered in the form of Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. Oh no, she was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA Homeowners Association. Armed with an iron will that could bend steel, a perpetually present clipboard, and an uncanny, almost supernatural ability to find fault in the tiniest, most insignificant details, she reigned supreme. To her, the neighborhood wasn't a community of friendly faces. It was her personal kingdom, and everyone else was merely a subject to be governed by her meticulously enforced rules. Her reign of petty terror had left many in the neighborhood quietly grumbling, their frustration simmering beneath forced smiles. But no one, not a single soul, dared to openly challenge her, that is, until she turned her laser-like focus on Bob and his cherished farm. It started innocently enough, or as innocent as a confrontation with Karen could possibly be. She appeared at Bob's doorstep one sunny morning, the clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield of righteous indignation. Her tone was deceptively polite, almost saccharine, but the pinched expression on her face betrayed the brewing storm within. "Bob," she began, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that made Bob's teeth ache, "I'm sure you're aware of our HOA guidelines. Your fence looks questionable." Pause for dramatic effect. Bob, a man of quiet patience, raised a questioning eyebrow. "Questionable?" he repeated, his gaze drifting over to the sturdy, well-maintained wooden fence that had stood proudly on his property long before the HOA had even been a twinkle in Karen's tyrannical eye. Karen's eyes narrowed into slits of disapproval as she nodded sharply, her lips pressed into a thin, unwavering line. "Yes. It doesn't quite align with the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood." She pronounced aesthetic with an almost reverent air, as if it were a sacred word. Suppressing a chuckle that threatened to bubble up, Bob calmly replied, "Karen, it's a fence. It's literally designed to, blend in." But Karen was undeterred, her resolve as solid as the oak trees on Bob's farm. "Rules are rules," she declared with a tight, almost predatory smile before thrusting a neatly typed violation notice into his hand. As she turned on her heel and marched back towards her own perfectly manicured lawn, Bob couldn't help but shake his head in bewildered amusement, wondering how anyone could take a simple fence so personally. Little did he know, this was merely the opening salvo in a much larger, far more ridiculous war. Karen's clipboard crusade had just begun, and Bob's peaceful farm was about to become ground zero for her latest, most infuriation power trip. Karen's trusty clipboard soon transformed into a weapon of mass frustration as she relentlessly ramped up her campaign against Bob's beloved farm. It seemed like every single day, a new, brightly colored violation notice mysteriously appeared in his mailbox, each one more absurd and nitpicky than the last. One sunny morning, Bob unfolded a shocking bright pink slip accusing him of unauthorized vegetation simply because his cheerful sunflowers dared to grow taller than the HOA's ridiculously specific recommended height of 6 feet. Another day brought a sternly worded citation for the reflective hazard allegedly caused by the gleam of the rooster weather vane perched proudly atop his barn. Bob found himself oscillating between fits of bewildered laughter and the urge to bury his head in his hands and weep. Karen didn't confine her reign of terror to mere notices. Oh no, she took her self-appointed patrol duties to an entirely new level of intensity. She began pacing the very edge of Bob's property with the unwavering focus and grim determination of a prison warden meticulously inspecting for contraband. On one memorable occasion, she stood on the public sidewalk, hands planted firmly on her hips, glaring at Bob's humble barn as if it had personally insulted her latest, undoubtedly unflattering, haircut. And then came the day Bob actually caught her pointing a laser pointer at his perfectly ordinary wooden fence, presumably attempting to measure its precise height down to the last minuscule fraction of an inch. That was the moment Bob's disbelief finally reached its breaking point. "Karen, are you serious right now?" he called out, leaning over his porch railing, his voice laced with incredulity. She spun around, her trusty clipboard held at the ready like a shield against the harsh light of reason. "I am ensuring compliance," she snapped back, her voice tight with self-importance, as if she were single-handedly preserving the very sanctity of the entire neighborhood from the catastrophic threat of a slightly too tall sunflower. Her increasingly bizarre antics escalated even further when she began actively enlisting other, presumably equally bored, HOA members to join her self-righteous cause. At a hastily arranged and poorly attended HOA meeting, Karen unveiled a truly spectacular slideshow presentation titled, with dramatic flair, "The Farm Problem," complete with a series of blurry, overly dramatic photographs of Bob's perfectly normal property. "This fence," she declared, her voice echoing with theatrical indignation as she pointed to a pixelated image projected onto the wall, "is an eyesore. It disrupts the very harmony of our neighborhood." Bob, unable to contain himself any longer, couldn't help but interject with a touch of dry sarcasm. "Karen, it's a wooden fence. It's practically invisible unless you're standing directly in my yard." Karen shot him a withering glare that could curdle milk. "It's the principle of the matter, Bob. The HOA guidelines are crystal clear, and we all have to abide by them." Despite Karen's fervent insistence, the other HOA members present were less than enthusiastic about her personal crusade against Bob's farm. A few offered polite, non-committal nods, but most exchanged thinly veiled amused glances or subtly rolled their eyes towards the ceiling. It was abundantly clear to everyone, except perhaps Karen herself, that her obsessive war on Bob's perfectly harmless farm was driven more by her insatiable need for control than by any genuine concern for neighborhood regulations. But Karen was not easily deterred by a mere lack of support. If anything, the lukewarm reception only seemed to fuel her unwavering determination. She began issuing dire warnings about potential fines for Bob's continued non-compliance and even went so far as to hint darkly at escalating the matter to unspecified legal action. Her dramatic behavior reached its absolute peak one fateful afternoon when Bob glanced out his kitchen window and caught her, in broad daylight, standing precariously on a wobbly stepladder just outside his property line, attempting to surreptitiously snap photographs over his fence. "Karen!" Bob bellowed, his voice booming across his yard as he marched purposefully towards her. "Get off my ladder!" She huffed, scrambling down with an exaggerated air of offended dignity. "I was merely inspecting for potential violations," she sniffed, clutching her precious clipboard to her chest like a badge of honor. Bob could only shake his head in utter disbelief. This wasn't just about a fence or a few errant sunflowers anymore. It had become a deeply personal vendetta, fueled by Karen's insatiable, almost comical need to wield power, no matter how utterly ridiculous the circumstances. And Bob, a man of quiet resolve, was now absolutely determined to push back against her petty tyranny, no matter how many more brightly colored violation slips she dared to stuff into his unsuspecting mailbox. Bob had always prided himself on his considerable patience, a virtue he often relied upon in his dealings with the world. But Karen, with her relentless barrage of petty complaints and increasingly outlandish violation notices, was testing the very limits of his usually unflappable restraint. Despite the constant stream of absurdity, Bob initially attempted to approach the escalating situation with a semblance of reason and logic. He believed, perhaps naively, that a calm discussion might somehow penetrate Karen's self-imposed fortress of rules and regulations. One particularly sunny afternoon, clipboard clutched firmly in hand, Karen returned to Bob's property, her expression a carefully constructed mask of concerned authority. "Bob," she began, her voice laced with a feigned concern that sounded about as genuine as a $3 bill, "the color of your barn door is well, it's simply not in line with the HOA's approved color palette." Bob, who had been enjoying a quiet afternoon tending to his tomato plants, straightened up, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Karen," he said slowly, enunciating each word carefully, "the barn door is brown. The same shade of brown it's been since before you even moved into this neighborhood." Karen pursed her lips, a sure sign that her inner rule-obsessed gears were turning. "Yes, well, it's not the right brown," she countered, flipping through a thick stack of paint swatches as though she were hosting an impromptu paint color seminar right there on Bob's lawn. Bob let out a long, weary sigh. "You know what, Karen? Fine. I'll consider repainting it. Maybe neon green?" He couldn't resist the urge to inject a little bit of absurdity into the conversation. Karen's reaction was instantaneous and utterly theatrical. Her gasp was so dramatic, so over the top, it could have earned her an award for performative outrage. That would be a direct violation of the guidelines. She sputtered, clutching her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. A small, almost imperceptible smirk played on Bob's lips. He knew he had finally managed to strike a nerve, to momentarily disrupt her unwavering commitment to petty rules. And in that moment, a new strategy began to form in his mind. From then on, Bob decided to abandon the path of direct confrontation and instead adopt a more subtle, far more entertaining approach to pushing back against Karen's increasingly ludicrous antics. When Karen left yet another brightly colored violation notice accusing him of having unapproved decorative elements for the utterly harmless birdhouse hanging in his oak tree, Bob responded not with argument, but with action. The very next day, 3 more birdhouses appeared in his yard, each one painted in a deliberately bright and cheerful color that was undoubtedly not on Karen's approved palette. When Karen, in her infinite wisdom, threatened fines for the excessive and frankly alarming height of his beloved sunflowers, Bob didn't cower. Instead, he announced a neighborhood sunflower growing contest, inviting all the neighbors to participate in a friendly competition to see who could grow the tallest, most magnificent sunflower. The event was a resounding success, with families gathering in Bob's yard, laughing, measuring their plants with exaggerated seriousness, and sharing stories. Karen, standing stiffly at the very edge of the gathering with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, could only watch as her authority was quietly, hilariously undermined. Bob also began meticulously collecting evidence of Karen's increasingly bizarre and, frankly, slightly unhinged behavior. Every single time she appeared on his property to inspect his perfectly ordinary fence or to surreptitiously snap photographs, Bob discreetly recorded her on his smartphone. The growing collection of footage was truly a sight to behold, Karen measuring blades of grass with a ruler, peering intently through his living room windows from the public sidewalk, and even teetering precariously on a stepladder in a desperate attempt to photograph the rooster weather vane atop his barn. But Bob's resistance wasn't solely confined to passive-aggressive acts of horticultural defiance and surreptitious recordings. He also began actively seeking out and cultivating support from his long-suffering neighbors. Over time, he discovered that Karen's reign of petty tyranny had impacted nearly everyone in their quiet little community. Tom, the easygoing guy who lived next door, shared a story about how Karen had issued him a formal warning because his kids' innocent chalk drawings on their own driveway weren't up to some arbitrary community standard. Sarah, a sweet retired teacher who lived just down the street, recounted with a wry smile how Karen had once accused her beloved tabby cat of unauthorized trespassing on another neighbor's meticulously manicured lawn. The stories were endless, each one more absurd and infuriating than the last, but they all shared a common thread: Karen's insatiable, almost comical obsession with control. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the neighborhood began to rally behind Bob. While no one was quite brave enough to directly confront the formidable Karen, they showed their support in small, yet significant ways, enthusiastically participating in his sunflower contest, sharing their own tales of Karen's overreach with knowing glances and shared sighs, and chuckling openly at Bob's increasingly sarcastic and witty remarks about her latest ridiculous violation notices. Karen, of course, noticed the subtle but undeniable shift in the neighborhood dynamics. She cast icy glares at the growing number of neighbors who dared to visit Bob's farm and grew visibly more frustrated by the distinct lack of enthusiastic compliance with her every decree. Her trusty clipboard became her constant companion, clutched so tightly it seemed like she believed she could somehow use it to magically regain the control she felt so desperately slipping through her fingers. But the more tightly she tried to grip, the more the neighborhood seemed to slip away, united by their shared exasperation. Bob's farm, once a quiet sanctuary, had inadvertently become a symbol of quiet rebellion, a rallying point for everyone who has silently endured Karen's long and tiresome reign of HOA tyranny. The stage was now set for the conflict to escalate further, with the entire community, whether they realized it or not, now playing a part in the unfolding drama. Karen's escalating antics, fueled by the chilling realization that her iron grip on the neighborhood was beginning to loosen, reached a new level of utter absurdity. Determined to reassert her dwindling authority, she turned her full, unwavering attention to Bob's farm, ramping up her already relentless efforts to impose her will. But Bob, now emboldened by the quiet support of his neighbors and armed with a growing arsenal of evidence of Karen's increasingly erratic behavior, was more than ready to fight back. One crisp morning, Bob woke up to the unwelcome sight of Karen once again trespassing on his property. This time, she was even more prepared, brandishing a shiny new measuring tape and her ever-present clipboard, furiously scribbling notes as she meticulously inspected the height of his perfectly ordinary wooden fence. Bob, now thoroughly accustomed to her bizarre intrusions, simply grabbed his phone and began recording. "Karen," he called out, his voice calm but firm as he approached her. "What exactly do you think you're doing on my property?" Karen whirled around, her eyes flashing with indignant fury, clutching her clipboard to her chest as if it were a sacred text under attack. "I am ensuring compliance with HOA guidelines," she snapped, her voice tight with self-righteousness. Bob couldn't help but smirk, holding up his phone for her to see. "You're trespassing, Karen, and I'm recording every single second of it." Karen's face flushed a deep shade of crimson, but she quickly regained her composure, drawing upon her seemingly endless reserves of self-importance. "This is absolutely necessary for the integrity of the neighborhood," she declared dramatically before finally storming off his property, muttering darkly under her breath about ungrateful residents and the imminent collapse of all societal order. Bob knew then that it was finally time to take decisive action. He meticulously reviewed the HOA bylaws, poring over the fine print, and realized with a growing sense of vindication that Karen had been not only overstepping her authority but also blatantly violating several of the very rules she so fiercely enforced on everyone else. Armed with his ever-growing collection of recordings, the mountain of ridiculous violation notices, and the increasingly vocal testimonies from his sympathetic neighbors, Bob began preparing for the next HOA meeting, a meeting that he knew, with a quiet certainty, would ultimately determine Karen's long and tiresome reign. The community meeting room was packed to the absolute brim. Word of Karen's increasingly outrageous behavior had spread like wildfire throughout the neighborhood, and nearly every resident had shown up, eager and perhaps a little bit giddy to witness the unfolding drama. Karen, utterly oblivious to the undercurrent of discontent swirling around her, arrived with her usual air of self-importance, her infamous binder of complaints clutched tightly under her arm. With a dramatic flourish, she slammed the weighty binder onto the table, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical level of authority, "the very state of our beloved neighborhood is at grave risk." Certain individuals she cast a pointed, accusatory glare in Bob's direction are blatantly and repeatedly disregarding our fundamental community standards. Bob, who had been waiting patiently for his moment, stood up, his demeanor calm and composed in stark contrast to Karen's agitated state. "If by community standards you mean your own personal vendettas and your obsessive need to control every single aspect of our lives, then yes, Karen, I suppose I am." A ripple of suppressed laughter ran through the room, and Karen's already narrowed eyes sharpened into dangerous slits. Bob then proceeded to methodically present his case. He played the collected video clips of Karen trespassing on his property, meticulously measuring his perfectly ordinary grass, and surreptitiously taking pictures over his fence. He read aloud a selection of the most ludicrous violation notices she had issued, highlighting with dry wit just how many of them had absolutely no basis whatsoever in the HOA's official guidelines. Finally, he called upon his neighbors to share their own experiences with Karen's overzealous enforcement. Tom, the affable neighbor from next door, was the first to speak, his voice filled with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "She actually fined me for leaving my trash cans out for literally 5 minutes after the scheduled pickup time." 5 minutes! he exclaimed, shaking his head in disbelief. Sarah, the sweet retired teacher, added her own anecdote with a gentle smile. "She informed me that my perfectly harmless bird feeder attracted undesirable wildlife. Last I checked, cardinals and blue jays weren't exactly a menace to the neighborhood." Rachel, the young mom, chimed in next, rolling her eyes dramatically. "And let's not forget the time she complained about my kids' chalk drawings. They're children, Karen, not graffiti artists." The room erupted in a wave of laughter and murmurs of agreement. As one by one, the neighbors bravely shared their own stories of Karen's petty tyranny, her face grew increasingly redder with each testimony, but she stubbornly tried to maintain her composure, repeatedly insisting that she was merely and diligently enforcing the rules. When it was finally Bob's turn to speak again, he delivered the final, decisive blow. According to the official HOA bylaws, he stated clearly, holding up the printed document for everyone to see, Karen has not only consistently overstepped the bounds of her authority as president, but she has also, in fact, violated multiple rules herself, including trespassing on private property, engaging in harassment of residents, and even misusing HOA funds for what appeared to be purely personal grievances. Gasps of shock and surprise filled the room. Karen tried desperately to interject, to deny the mounting evidence against her, but the sheer volume of testimonies and Bob's meticulously documented proof was simply overwhelming. The other members of the HOA board, who had remained largely silent throughout the proceedings, exchanged serious glances and finally nodded in grim agreement. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, one of the board members stated, his voice firm and resolute, "It is abundantly clear that Karen has been acting far outside the scope of her authority. Therefore, effective immediately, Karen is hereby removed from her position as HOA president." The room erupted into thunderous applause and cheers of relief. Karen, utterly speechless for perhaps the first time in her life, simply grabbed her precious binder and stormed out of the meeting, her long and tiresome reign of petty tyranny officially, and gloriously, over. But the poetic justice didn't end there. Oh no, fate, it seemed, had a particularly delicious twist in store for the now former queen of the HOA. Exactly 1 week later, Karen herself received an official violation notice. The offense? Her own set of overly bright, decidedly non-HOA compliant holiday decorations that she had stubbornly refused to take down months after the designated removal date. The delicious irony of the situation was certainly not lost on the delighted neighbors, who promptly celebrated Karen's epic downfall with an impromptu block party held right on Bob's farm. As Bob stood among his fellow residents, watching the children laugh and play and the community finally enjoying a sense of camaraderie they hadn't felt in years, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of satisfaction. Karen's reign of terror was finally over, and the neighborhood could finally, truly return to the peaceful, welcoming place it was always meant to be. With Karen officially dethroned as the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the entire neighborhood collectively exhaled a long, overdue sigh of relief. Her absence was palpable, a tangible weight lifted from the atmosphere. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the quiet cul-de-sac felt lighter, freer, and filled with a genuine sense of community. But as the old saying goes, karma has a rather delightful way of delivering poetic justice, and Karen's downfall, it turned out, was far from over. It began with the very same set of meticulously crafted HOA rules that she had so gleefully weaponized against everyone else. Exactly 1 week after the fateful HOA meeting, Karen received an official certified letter from the newly elected HOA president, Tom. As one of his very first acts in office, Tom, with a mischievous glint in his eye, had conducted a thorough and equally meticulous review of Karen's own property, applying the exact same level of scrutiny and nitpicking that she had so enthusiastically inflicted upon others for so long. The verdict? Karen was found to be in violation of multiple HOA guidelines. Her extensive list of offenses ranged from the garishly bright pink plastic flamingos that inexplicably dotted her perfectly manicured lawn to the blinding string of multicolored holiday lights that she had stubbornly refused to take down well past the HOA-approved holiday decorating period. The most deliciously ironic violation, however, was her very own fence, the same style and color as Bob's, which was found to be a shocking 2 inches taller than the neighborhood regulations allowed. When the official violation notice landed squarely on her doorstep, Karen, predictably, was absolutely livid. She stormed over to Tom's house, clutching the offending letter in her trembling hand, her face a mask of incandescent fury. "This is outrageous!" she bellowed, waving the paper wildly in his face. Tom, a man of newfound authority and quiet amusement, simply leaned against his doorframe, his expression calm and composed. "Rules are rules, Karen," he replied with a perfectly straight face, though a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk played around the corners of his lips. "Surely you understand." But the real, Genuine satisfaction came not just from Karen's well-deserved comeuppance, but from the remarkable way the neighborhood responded in the days and weeks following her dramatic demotion. The neighbors, united by their shared experience of enduring Karen's tyranny, came together in ways she could never have possibly imagined. Bob's farm, once a source of contention, became the unofficial hub for spontaneous community gatherings. Families hosted impromptu barbecues, kids ran unplayed games in the open fields, and neighbors bonded over shared stories of Karen's most ridiculous antics, their laughter echoing through the once tense cul-de-sac. Bob, ever the gracious and good-natured host, decided to throw a proper celebration, a symbolic freedom party to mark the end of Karen's reign. The event was attended by nearly every single household in the neighborhood, and the mood was nothing short of jubilant. Tom delivered a short, humorous speech, thanking Bob for his courage in standing up to Karen and for inadvertently bringing the entire neighborhood closer together. The absolute highlight of the evening came when Sarah, the sweet retired teacher, unveiled a surprise she had been secretly working on, a large, beautifully crafted sunflower-shaped plaque, complete with the heartfelt inscription, "In honor of Bob, defender of the neighborhood." The crowd erupted in enthusiastic cheers as Bob, touched by the gesture, accepted the plaque with a warm smile, a tangible and light-hearted reminder of how far they had all come. Meanwhile, Karen's presence in the neighborhood dwindled to almost nothing. She rarely ventured out of her house, except perhaps to cast a dark and resentful glare at the joyful gatherings taking place on Bob's farm. Rumors began to circulate that she was planning to sell her home, unable to bear the sheer embarrassment of her public dethroning and the vibrant sense of camaraderie that had blossomed so beautifully in her absence. And then, one day, it actually happened. A large moving truck appeared in front of Karen's perfectly manicured house, and within a few short hours, she and her meticulously organized belongings were gone. The neighborhood didn't waste a single moment in mourning her departure. That very evening, a group of neighbors spontaneously hung cheerful decorations along the street and held an impromptu gathering to celebrate their newfound freedom. The air itself seemed lighter, filled with laughter and genuine warmth, and the neighborhood, at long last, truly felt like home again. Bob stood on his porch, watching as his neighbors laughed and mingled under the soft glow of the setting sun. Tom raised his glass in Bob's direction, a wide grin on his face. "To Bob," he called out loudly, his voice filled with genuine appreciation, "for reminding us all that even the most stubborn clipboard can't ruin a good neighborhood." The crowd roared with laughter and enthusiastic applause. Bob couldn't help but smile, a deep and genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Karen was finally gone, his beloved farm stood tall and proud, and the neighborhood was united in a way it had never been before. It was a victory for everyone, a testament to the power of community and a gentle reminder that sometimes, the very best way to handle a Karen is simply to let karma take its sweet, sweet time. As the last rays of sunlight faded and the party continued to hum with happy chatter, Bob leaned back in his favorite porch chair, a deep sense of contentment washing over him. The grass in his yard grew freely, his sturdy wooden fence stood proudly, and the community around him thrived. Life in their little cul-de-sac was finally peaceful once more, and for that, Bob couldn't have been happier. Valuable lesson. The enduring lesson we can all take away from this story is the importance of community spirit and the quiet power of standing together against unreasonable authority. Even seemingly small acts of defiance and unity can ultimately overcome negativity and restore peace and harmony. It also serves as a gentle reminder that petty rules and regulations should never overshadow the fundamental importance of neighborliness, common sense, and a good sense of humor. If you love this story and found it even remotely entertaining, please don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up to show your support and help more people discover the satisfying tale of Karen's epic downfall. Subscribe to our channel for more engaging, hilarious, and ultimately heartwarming stories just like this one. Share this video with your friends, your family, or anyone in your life who has ever had their own unforgettable Karen moment. They'll surely be able to relate. And most importantly, please leave a comment below and tell us your favorite part of the story, or even share your own personal experiences with the often dramatic world of HOA encounters. We absolutely love hearing from you. Finally, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another one of our outrageous or uplifting stories. Thanks so much for being a part of our wonderful community, and we'll see you in the next one.